Usually when people pick up a scriptural record, they enter this very specific mode.
Right. They're looking for the lesson.
Exactly. You're looking for theology, or you're looking for sermons, maybe some ethical guidance for your week. But if you take a text like the Book of Mormon and you stop treating it like a Sunday school lesson and start treating it like a raw data set, things get weirdly specific. You start seeing patterns that have nothing to do with religion and everything to do with, well, survival.
It really does change the entire texture of the read, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It stops being a collection of moral stories and starts looking like a geopolitical map. You stop asking what the moral of the story is and start asking, why did this army cross the river at this specific point?
Yeah.
Or how do they feed 20,000 people in a siege?
Right. And that is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to our deep dive into the source text, growth, and governance in ancient Zarahemla. We are stripping away the theology for a moment to look at the Nephite and Lamanite civilizations as real, functioning societies.
And specifically, we're looking at Mesoamerica, the Chiapas region of Mexico, and the highlands of Guatemala, right around the 1st and 2nd centuries BC.
And the mission here for you listening is really to unpack how that geography, the literal ground beneath their feet, dictated their politics.
The argument the source makes is that the landscape, the stark difference between the steamy lowlands and the jagged volcanic highlands, actually forced these people into specific political structures and specific types of warfare. We aren't just reading stories today. We are reconstructing a civilization from the ground up.
So let's start at ground zero for this era, the city of Zarahemla. The source places this in the Grijalva River Valley in Chiapas. Now, I think a common assumption is that Zarahemla was this unified, happy religious capital, like a shining city on a hill.
Which is a lovely image, but the text paints a completely different picture. If you look at the demographics provided in the source, Zarahemla around 120 BC is a powder keg.
Yeah, it's not unified at all.
Not at all. It's a metropolis in the middle of a massive identity crisis.
Because it wasn't just the Nephites. The source outlines 3 distinct groups crashing into each other, almost like a car pileup of cultures. First, you have the Molochites.
Or the people of Zarahemla, as they're called.
Right, the indigenous folks, the old Isthmian tradition.
They are the locals. They have the numbers, and they've been there for centuries.
Then you have the Nephites, who come down from the highlands with King Mosiah I. They are the minority, but they install themselves as the ruling elite.
Which always goes over well.
Oh, always. And then, just to make it even messier, you have the Nephite refugees showing up later. They are fleeing from Lamanite territory, bringing their own baggage and trauma into the city.
Think about the administrative nightmare that creates. You have a majority population, the Molochites being ruled by a minority elite, the Nephites, who speak a different language and have a different religion. And now you dump a third group of refugees into the mix who have been living with the enemy. The text explicitly says King Mosiah couldn't just govern effectively anymore. The old tribal ways were breaking under the weight of the population.
Yeah, it mentions that the population became so large they couldn't even hear him. He couldn't just call a town hall meeting. He had to split them into 7 separate churches or assemblies just to get a message out.
And here's a key insight from the source. That administrative bottleneck is likely what forced the shift to written record-keeping for governance.
That makes a lot of sense.
Before this, writing might have been mostly for ritual or royal history. But when you have a fragmented, massive population, you need bureaucracy. You need to write things down to ensure uniformity across those 7 assemblies. It marks the transition from a tribal chieftaincy to a bureaucratic state.
It's strictly utilitarian. Writing wasn't for art, it was for crowd control. Now, speaking of crowds, the source material actually dares to put numbers on this population explosion. Usually, ancient history is vague, just, many people or countless hosts.
Very true.
But we have casualty reports from the Amlethite Wars around 90 BC.
The numbers are incredibly specific, which is rare for ancient texts. The record lists exactly 12,532 Amlecites killed and 6,562 Nephites killed.
Oddly specific. So roughly 19,000 dead in a short campaign. And if we apply standard historical mortality rates for ancient hand-to-hand combat,
you're usually looking at a 10 to 20% casualty rate for the losing side in this type of warfare.
Which implies a total combatant force of maybe 40 to 50,000 men on the field. If you extrapolate that out to a general population, using a standard 1-to-5 warrior-to-civilian ratio, you're looking at a Nephite population of around 200,000 people.
That sounds reasonable for a regional state in that area. But here is the kicker. The text says the Lamanites were, quote, more than double the Nephites. So, conservatively, we are looking at a Lamanite population of over 400,000, maybe pushing 500,000.
And this is where the skeptical part of my brain kicks in. Can the land of Nephi, which this source identifies as the communal Juyu area in highland Guatemala, actually support 500,000 people in 90 BC? That seems huge for the ancient world.
It is huge. But the archaeology says yes, emphatically. Communal Juyu was a massive demographic center. Excavators there found a single mound, Mound E33, that was built using debris scraped from the surrounding residential areas.
Okay.
They analyzed the density of trash in that dirt to estimate population density.
Just the trash in one mound.
Just the trash. They calculated that the fill in that one mound contained fragments of roughly 500,000 pottery vessels.
500,000 broken pots in one pile of dirt. That's why.
Exactly. That implies a density of occupation that perfectly matches the hundreds of thousands implied by the text. The land wasn't empty. It was teeming with people. It was a high-density urban environment.
So you have a crowded, tense, stratified society. Inevitably, that tension snaps. And that brings us to the Amlecite rebellion. Now, usually this is taught as you know. Amlichi was a bad guy who wanted to be king. But the source argues this wasn't just a religious disagreement. This was a coup attempt rooted in that demographic split we talked about earlier.
It was a restorationist movement. Amlichi isn't just a random rebel. The source suggests he's likely a descendant of that old Mulkite nobility, the majority group that got sidelined by the Nephite minority.
Yeah.
He wants to restore the old order of kings, replacing the Nephite judges. He's tapping into generations of resentment.
And the geography of this war is fascinating because it's not random. The source tracks where the Amlicites gathered. They didn't just meet in the town square. They went to a specific location in the lower river area, downstream from Zarahemla.
Right. In real-world terms, if Zarahemla is in the upper Grijalva Valley, this gathering spot is the Chiapas de Corzo region.
Why does downstream matter politically?
Because the downstream area is the gateway to the rest of Mesoamerica. It's lower, hotter, and crucially, it's wealthier. It has older ties to the Olmec traditions and the Maya trade networks. Culturally, the people downstream would have felt very different from the Nephites upstream. Amlichi is leveraging a geographic and cultural divide to build his army.
So he's basically saying, we have the money, we have the trade connections, why are we taking orders from the guys upstream?
Precisely. And his military strategy was terrifyingly competent. The source calls it a geopolitical vice. He lures the Nephite army out of their capital, pulling them downstream toward his stronghold.
Right, drawing them away from their defenses. And while the Nephites are busy fighting Amlichi's rebels in the north, a separate Lamanite army invades from the west.
It was a pincer movement on a civilization scale. It nearly worked. The Nephites were fighting on two fronts, dictated entirely by the river valley topography. They had to cross the riverside, the Grijalva, to engage. The descriptions in the text of the bodies flowing downstream, the banks being clogged, it all fits the specific hydrology of that river. It's a fast-moving, dangerous river in a deep valley.
So the Nephites barely survive this. The war ends, but the society is wrecked. And this is where the narrative shifts to Alma. He decides the political solution has failed, so he tries a religious one. He goes on this famous preaching tour. But looking at the map provided in the source, he isn't wandering aimlessly.
No, he's hitting the strategic satellite cities to shore up loyalty. He's doing a circuit of the defensive perimeter.
He goes to Gideon, which the source places in the uplands east of the river, the Confident Valley. Then he swings over to Melek. But the really interesting stop, and the one that felt like a movie script to me, is Ammonihah.
Ammonihah is crucial. The source identifies it with the archaeological site of Mirador in western Chiapas.
Paint the picture of Mirador for us. Why is this specific spot important?
It's geographically unique. It sits in a low valley, almost a hole, but it controls the main trade route to the Pacific coast. It's a commercial hub. It's wealthy, cosmopolitan, and heavily fortified.
And the people there are incredibly hostile to Alma. They aren't just indifferent, they are aggressive. The text mentions a detail that always stuck out to me. They burned the records. They burned books.
Which implies they had books to burn in the first place.
Yeah.
And here is the archaeological nugget. Excavations at Mirador and the surrounding area show a deep tradition of literacy. They found evidence of codices, ancient paper books, though, from a slightly later period. But it establishes that this region was a center of scribal tradition.
So in a world where literacy was rare, this specific city was a known center for it.
Exactly. Burning the books wasn't just destroying paper. It was a symbolic rejection of the Nephite legal and religious tradition. It was a declaration of independence. They were saying, we reject your law.
And then comes the destruction. The text says the Lamanites destroyed Ammonihah in a single day, and they came in upon the, quote, wilderness side.
This is where the map makes the story click. If you look at Chiapas, there is a coastal corridor, a flat, easy route that runs up the west side. It's a superhighway for an army. If you take that route north and then cut inland over the mountains, the very first city you hit, the one sitting right there exposed, is Mirador.
So Ammonihah wasn't just unlucky, it was geographically vulnerable. The Lamanites used the back door of the coastal corridor.
Precisely. They bypassed the southern forts and struck the soft underbelly. Ammonihah fell because of where it sat on the map. Geography dictated its destruction.
Let's shift gears and move south. We've been hanging out with the Nephites in Chiapas. Now let's go to the land of Nephi, the highlands of Guatemala. This is the mission of the sons of Mosiah.
This is a totally different environment. We're moving from hot river valleys up into the cool volcanic highlands.
The source tracks their journey perfectly. It mentions they reach a crossroads where they split up. The source identifies this as Los Encuentros,
Which is still a major highway junction today in Guatemala. It's the natural geographic point where paths from the four cardinal directions meet. It's reassuring when the logic of the terrain stays the same for 2,000 years. If you're walking across Guatemala, you end up at Los Encuentros.
So Aaron, one of the brothers, goes to a city called Jerusalem. Now, obviously not the Middle Eastern city.
No, but the name is significant. It was built by dissenters who knew Jewish tradition. The source places this city on the shores of Lake Atitlan.
If you haven't seen pictures of Lake Atitlan, you need to look them up. It's this massive caldera lake ringed by 3 volcanoes. It's stunning.
And the text describes the location as having great waters. The locals consider the lake bottomless and connected to the underworld. It is a very heavy, mystical atmosphere.
There's a prophecy about this city in the text, right? That it would be covered by water during the cataclysms.
This is one of those moments where geology backs up the text in a surprising way. Lake Atitlan is an endorheic basin, meaning it has no surface outlet. The water has nowhere to go but up or down, depending on rainfall and subterranean shifts. We know from geological records that the lake level has fluctuated wildly up to 60 feet in historical times.
Wow. So a city built on the shoreline could literally be swallowed up if the water table shifted.
Easily. It's a hazard of that specific ecosystem. The sunken city isn't a myth, it's a geological probability for that lake.
Then you have another brother, Ammon, going to the land of Medoni to rescue his friends. The source identifies Medoni as the Valley of Antigua.
Another volcanic valley, famous for being lush, beautiful, and absolutely prone to devastating earthquakes. The Spanish capital there was destroyed by earthquakes multiple times.
Yeah.
It fits the volatile nature of the lands described in the text.
But let's talk about the politics of this mission. The sons of Mosiah aren't just preaching, they're causing a civil war. The converts weren't just random individuals scattered across the map. They were clustered in a specific region around the capital, Kaminaljuyu.
Right. Think of the capital as the hub of a wheel. The converts control the hub, but the people who refuse to convert live in the foothills and the peripheral areas.
And these peripheral areas are the older, richer zones with deep Olmec roots.
Exactly. So when the capital converts and aligns with the Nephites, the people in the foothills see it as an existential threat. They are being cut out of the trade network.
It's an economic embargo.
It is. The source outlines this really clearly. They aren't just angry about religion. They are angry because the king just sold out their economy to their enemies in the north. That explains the ferocity of the slaughter that follows. It was a geopolitical purge to regain control of the trade routes.
It always comes down to trade and money, doesn't it?
Often, yes. Or at least, those are the sparks that light the fire. Ideology provides the fuel, but economics provides the match.
We keep coming back to this idea that these weren't simple tribes. This was a complex, stratified society. The source emphasizes the class warfare aspect heavily.
The archaeology screams inequality. There's a tomb at Chiapas de Corzo from this exact period, 1st century BC, that contained a burial with 35 imported pottery vessels.
Imported from where?
All over Mesoamerica. Oaxaca, El Salvador, Veracruz. Some of these goods came from 600 miles away.
That implies a level of logistical power that is staggering. If you can command luxury goods from 600 miles away, you aren't a subsistence farmer.
No, you are part of a globalized elite. And that's what the text is constantly critiquing: the costly apparel, the class distinctions.
Yeah.
They are describing a material reality that we can dig up today. The gap between the rich and the poor was widening right at this moment in history.
Speaking of elites, let's talk about the kingship model. The text describes a Lamanite king who rules from sea to sea, but he doesn't seem to manage the day-to-day of every city. It feels very loose.
This is what scholars call the Toulon concept of power. Think of it like a franchise system.
A franchise, like fast food.
In a structural sense, yes. The big king at Kamaljuyu holds the charter of sovereignty. He has the ritual authority. If you want to be a legitimate king in a smaller city like King Lamoni, you need the big king's stamp of approval. You operate under his banner.
So Lamoni is the regional manager.
Correct. The big king doesn't need soldiers on every corner because his power is based on prestige and ritual lineage. He grants the right to rule. But that also means the system is fragile. If a regional manager like Lamoni converts to a new religion and rejects the big king's authority,
He's breaking the franchise contract. He's going rogue.
and the whole network creates a domino effect. It destabilizes the legitimacy of every other king in the network. That's why the conversion of a few local leaders caused a continental crisis. It wasn't just a personal choice, it was a systemic breach.
Before we wrap up, we have to hit the archaeological nuggets. These are the small details from the source that just fit too well to ignore. The first one is the sepulcher.
The story of King Lamoni falling into a trance. His servants want to place him in a sepulcher. Now, most people imagine a stone cave or a mausoleum. But at Kamaljuyu, the elite tombs, like Mount Ethriathgigan, were dug into earthen platforms, roofed with heady timber and covered with clay.
And there was a dark detail in the text about the servants. They were terrified that if the king died, they would be executed.
And the archaeology confirms that fear was completely justified. That same tomb contained the skeletons of sacrificed victims, likely servants or wives, killed to accompany the ruler into the afterlife.
So their fear wasn't just, I'm going to get fired or I'm going to be punished. It was, I'm going to get buried.
It adds a very real, very horrific stake to that story. They were fighting for their lives.
The second nugget is about money. The text mentions senines and cheblons of silver and gold. Critics have hammered this for years because there were no coins in ancient America.
And the critics are right about the coins, but wrong about the text. The text never actually says coins. It describes a system of weights.
Right, a senine of gold is a measurement of weight, not a minted face.
Exactly. And Mesoamerica used a weight-based currency system. Cacao beans, jade, and standard weights of precious metals were copper. We found similar metal wealth storage weights in places like Ecuador. A weight-based economy fits the ancient context perfectly. A coinage system would be an anachronism. The text gets it right by being specific about weights.
It's amazing how our modern assumptions like money equals coins can blind us to what the text is actually saying.
That's the danger of reading history without the context. You project your own world onto theirs.
So bringing this all together, we have mapped the demographics, the wars, the trade routes, and the geography. What is the big takeaway for you from all this source material?
For me, it grounds the spiritual struggle in a physical reality. The Nephites weren't just fighting sin in the abstract. They were fighting to maintain a prophetic, ethical society in the middle of a Mesoamerican culture that was obsessed with hierarchy, power, and nature worship. They were swimming upstream, both culturally and geographically.
And the geography itself was hostile to unity.
That's the crucial point. The highlands of Guatemala are balkanized. The mountains chop the land into isolated valleys. That geography promotes tribalism. It promotes separation.
Geography is destiny.
It really is.
So here's a thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. The Nephites spent centuries trying to build a unified Zion society, but the very land they lived on, the jagged mountains, the separated valleys, the roaring rivers, was constantly pushing them toward fragmentation and war. If they were fighting the geography as much as they were fighting their enemies, did they ever really stand a chance? Does the environment we live in put a hard ceiling on our moral potential? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
A pleasure to be here.